So let's start with the intros. The easiest way, I guess, is for me to share. You don't have to share if you don't want to. I have four kids, but I also have you beat because I'm on the other side of where you're at. My oldest is 35, my youngest is 30. So there's only 5 years between them. And I was divorced about 24 years ago. And it was more like a War of the Roses kind of divorce. We didn't have anything related to conscious uncoupling or mediation or anything like that back then. So it was really difficult. And to put icing on the cake, she moved 1,000 miles away and took the four kids and the dog. So it was a little bit like something out of the soap operas because we were divorced in April. She moved out in June. She came back for the kids and the dog August 1st. And on September 15th, she was married. My kids had a new stepdad. And so I had a very similar experience in terms of I bought an answering machine so I could leave a message to ask the children to call me, and she wouldn't even connect up the answering machine so that I could leave a message for the kids. This was kind of pre-cell phone, so I'm kind of dating myself here, but it was definitely a challenging situation. My youngest was 6 at the time. My oldest was 11. So why don't I just slide right in from that? Well, why don't we just quickly, it seems like you guys are all pretty regulars here. I'd like to share my slide deck. So those are my four kids. The youngest is Kurt. He's the one who's 30, and my oldest is Boone, and he's 35. I have one daughter, three boys. So what I wanted to talk about is hopefully what we're going to cover. We've kind of done introductions. I may give you a little bit more background about me, and then we'll talk about 2 of the 12 essentials that I've identified. Do what's best for the kids, and we'll have a discussion, and then be a great co-parent, be great at co-parenting, and then if we have time, we'll talk about some skills and capacities. Okay. So moving on. The first of these, the essentials that I have in my book, which is single dad essentials, but it's relevant for both moms and dads, is always do what's best for the kids, because that's what's best for you. This is a primary theme that I have found out that works really well. Because what happens is that is the one thing that you and your former spouse have in common. Typically, you both want what is best for the kids. It can be really a challenge to talk about that and to get to agreement about it. But underneath it all, that's the one thing that you really have in common, is you will always be the kids' mom and dad. And there will be events. There'll be joint events. Events like birthdays, graduations, marriages, births of grandchildren, and other key life events. And so you want to be able to create that bridge in communication so that you can work together to help your children and to support them in those key life events. So why is this so important? Because your children form their opinions, their beliefs, and their identities modeled after your behaviors, the behavior of their dad and their mom. And so in order to have a healthy, happy outlook and disposition, they need to feel loved, safe, and taken care of. They also need to have access to and deserve to be supported by their extended families with grandparents, aunts and uncles and nieces and nephews. And that's a really big part of their community that creates them and helps them to be happy and healthy. And their cousins, both sides of the family, both from the mom and the dad. Another really difficult thing that will come up in the second item as well is they should never be put in the middle or asked to choose or asked to take sides. This is really difficult. Um, Personally, I had a huge challenge with this with my daughter. There were many times when I would hear accusations and derogatory comments come out of her mouth that I knew were exact words from her mother. And she wanted to know why and how come I was such a bad person. Well, I had known for about a year and a half that her mom had had an affair. But I never shared that with my kids until they were 16 or 17 years old. And I only shared that with them when they again asked at that age. And then I asked them if they really, really wanted to know. So I never knowingly disparaged their mom or tried to drive a wedge between them and their mom. And that was really important. And there are many times I just say, well, I'm not going to talk about that, or I can't talk about that. The other thing is that in an ideal situation, you and the other spouse or other former spouse need to have a consistent set of expectations and rules for the kids. It gets really confusing for them and actually becomes a real negative if living in one house they have one set of rules and living in another house they have another set of rules. This can really cause confusion and set them up to have difficult times in school, have difficult times with friends. And to the follow on or the corollary to that is that they need to be held accountable for their actions to the same extent. What kind of consequences are there when they break certain rules? Again, in an ideal situation, you want to discuss this with your former spouse and you really want to have an agreement about this because this is what's really healthy and creates the best opportunity for them to have healthy and happy relationships in their lives and not pass along what it is that you have modeled for them. And then again, there's a larger nurturing community. So there's extended family, grandparents on both sides, aunts and uncles, cousins and nieces. And then there's also school, after school activities, sports teams. If you're involved in a traditional religious affiliation, churches can be a great place, or synagogues can be a great place to receive additional community and nurturing. And sometimes in divorce situations, we have a tendency to want to make the kids happy. We have a tendency to give them what they want when they want it, because it maybe we think puts us a step up or a little bit higher in their opinion. And so this is something that, you really want to be careful of. It's more that you should be giving what it is that they need when they need it. And then when things go well and they're making good progress on things that are important, then you can help give them some things that they want. I have a little bit of a concern because my next single parenting essential is about being a great co-parent. And we've kind of talked about this and we're definitely explored the difficulties of doing this. So one of the things that I'd like to share is that in an ideal situation with a lot of the people that I work with, I catch them before the divorce is final. I catch them when they're still trying to figure out what divorce is going to look like. And so it's during that particular phase that it's really the ideal situation to work out the possible co-parenting and visitation rights. Again, keeping in mind you really want to always do what's best for the children, because that's what's best for you. Even if sometimes you have to take care of yourselves, because you have to be healthy and you have to be happy so that you can be a good parent. So these are the tips for when you get to a point where you have an opportunity to create healthy co-parenting. So the first bullet item is kind of what I was talking about, jointly working through a conscious uncoupling. This is where you get to a point where you both can agree and understand that you both co-created the situation that you were living in. So in some ways, you're equally responsible for what happened in the marriage and in the relationship. And so therefore, you both have equal responsibility in terms of creating what goes forward. Hopefully, you can work towards forgiving each other the hurts and transgressions by seeing how some of your actions may have actually promoted the situation, and then making an amends. An amends doesn't necessarily mean that you did something wrong. An amends is acknowledging that something that you did had an unintended negative consequence. And you now see that the unintended negative consequence is hurtful or painful or had a completely different outcome than what you intended it for. So you can literally say that you see what the negative consequences were. It was not your intention. I'm really sorry for those negative consequences. It was not my intentions. And I am now committed to doing something different, whatever it is, doing ABC different going forward in the future, because I don't want that to happen again. That is a powerful way to ask for and get to forgiveness with someone else. The other thing that I want to share with each of you is that I want to go back a step to the conscious uncoupling. When I became a conscious uncoupling coach, I'm not necessarily selling my coaching services here, but I'm selling the process of going through a conscious uncoupling for yourself. There's a book by Catherine Woodward Thomas called Conscious Uncoupling: 5 Steps to Living Happily Even After. And what you want to do is you want to consciously uncouple from the negative patterns of the past with your former spouse. You want to consciously uncouple from the behavioral patterns that you contributed, that you helped co-create the situation that went through. And so you want to then go through this process to get to a more deeper, healthier, well-adjusted version of yourself by uncoupling from the past relationship and your past negative patterns and your past false beliefs and identity system. It's a very powerful process. And that's what enabled me to change the relationship with my former spouse 24 years later. So, suggested reading, it's a powerful book, it's a powerful perspective, and it helps guide you through some deep work. So, forgiving, healing, and loving yourself by growing through it. A lot of us have a tendency to be stuck in victimhood, shaming and blaming ourselves, shaming and blaming others. By doing the deeper work, you can heal that, take ownership, take responsibility for what happened, and leverage the learning. You know, we all make mistakes. It's human nature. It's part of our journey to make mistakes. And what we do with the mistakes is how we define ourselves. So when we learn from our mistakes and we grow from them and we leverage them into not doing them anymore. You know, a simple example of that is learning to ride a bicycle. The first time you learned to ride a bicycle, you fell down a whole bunch of times. But eventually you learned what not to do because you leveraged the learning from the pain of falling down. And then you learned how to ride the bike and you got really good at it. So that's an opportunity inside of these difficult situations that we find ourselves in sometimes with our children and with our former spouses. And again, it can be helpful that there were good things that happened. The children came from a relationship that started in love, that there were adventures, that there were good experiences before things went bad. So there was a progression. So it can be helpful to remember that it wasn't your intention that things turned out that way, but unfortunately did. And so you can be grateful for what the good things that did happen. A lot of times the greatest thing to be grateful for are your children. One of the important things about being a healthy, happy co-parent is taking good care of yourself so that you can take good care of your kids. It also creates an environment where you're healthy and happy and you can negotiate for yourself and you can stand in curiosity instead of being defensive or being shamed and blamed and being the victim again. So do the work, take good care of yourself and help yourself be in a better place mentally, physically, and spiritually. And it will help in all areas of your life, not just with your kids and not just in the relationship with your co-parent. The last one's kind of obvious here because we've kind of talked about it already. But the faster that you can go through the heartbreak, through the pain, through the helplessness and fear, frustration, anger, etc., the sooner that you're going to come out the other side. The sooner that you're going to be able to stop that pain and helplessness coming out sideways and possibly hurting other people. So when you feel yourself tensing up, feeling that anger, feeling the emotion, hearing your voice change tone, take a deep breath, step back, ask yourself, why am I getting so anxious? What is causing me to change my anxiety and get into fight and flight? So stay in curiosity, lean in. And a lot of times asking questions of, please tell me more, please explain, please help me understand, can increase the level of communication instead of leaning out and shutting down out of frustration, fear, or pain. Can help open the bridge to being a better co-parent and opening up communication. Definitely having some technical difficulties here tonight. There's some additional bullets here. You also want to make sure that you don't criticize or disrespect the other parent, because your kids are going to hear that. It's going to cause them to be confused. It's going to cause them to want to be, I'm sorry, this is about being a poor co-parent. These are traits or actions that make it difficult for the kids as a co-parent. So criticizing and disrespecting or blaming the other parent, talking down about them, making them bad or evil, it's going to cause your kids a lot of confusion. They deserve to have both a mother and a father. And when you do that, you put them in the middle. And then they act out, they get scared, and they learn to disrespect both of you because they don't know who to believe. They don't know who to trust. And when that happens, it will likely cause them to struggle in their lives. Instead of learning valuable life skills, they're going to learn low self-esteem. They're going to have low self-confidence and maybe even poor or bad social skills. And when they don't trust you and they don't feel loved, it can be even more confusing, and they may look outside of the home to get that love. Sometimes children get it from grandparents. And if they're not lucky to be able to get it from grandparents, they may get it from peers at school or gangs or even other groups. And you don't know what those other groups might be interested in, whether it's drug or possible addiction. And so they're likely then won't know how to behave in relationships. and to receive or give love as adults. So one of the greatest things, the reason I'm passionate about being a relationship coach and being a single dad coach is because I want to break the karma. Many times if you look back in your family lineage, there's a lot of the same traits and characteristics in the relationship that you've had and what's being modeled for the children that they're then learning and that they will then pass on in their life to their children. So I'd really love for you to break the chain and to be able to create a healthier opportunity for them. I'm not going to go through this because I've basically talked about it so far in the previous bullets. But these are also additional good co-parenting skills. You know, one of the things that you really want to be careful of with your children is not assume you know what they're saying or where they're coming from. You want to, if they're saying something that makes you uncomfortable, I really encourage you to lean in and stay curious. Ask them why they're saying that. Ask them why they want something. Ask them why they're so angry and frustrated with something that you're doing or suggesting. Getting them to talk about it and explain it to you might open you up to understanding and seeing things from a different perspective. But most importantly, it will make your children feel heard. Making them feel heard and understood is one of the best ways to have connection. Catherine Woodward Thomas quotes that I really love is, attention is the currency of love. Attention is the currency of love. And so by leaning in and asking your kids questions and being curious about what it is they're feeling, what they're thinking, what they enjoy doing, what they don't enjoy doing, and why, it's a great way to give them and spend time with them and give them your attention. It can be really frustrating, just like sometimes our spouses shut us down because they think they know where we're coming from or they think they know our intentions. Sometimes we do that without thinking to our children. And it causes them to have the same kind of experiences and concerns that you have. The other thing, again, and this isn't an ideal situation, and I get it, Ian and Joe, that this is difficult for you guys, but you would really like to have the same set of rules in both homes. You'd even like to have the same kind of disciplinary action in both homes, because this creates a consistent environment for the children. It creates a lot of less confusion, and it minimizes them playing the two of you off against each other. Teenagers are really great at this. Oh, but mom does it this way, and she says this, and it's okay because mom says that and does this. And then you're stuck either having to argue with your mom or whatever. And then when the mother tells them to do something, they say, well, dad does it this way and dad says it's that way. And so if the two of you are not communicating, it creates a great fertile ground for teenagers. And they start young. They may start as young as 10 or 11 years old or 8 or 9 years old, playing the two of you off against each other. And that can be a challenge. So it's a great reason to open up, if possible, the communication channels with your spouse so that you can be clear about what they really said and what they really didn't say. And maybe that's a door that you can open up to hopefully get some communication going and start a little bit better on the co-parenting. Also, ideally, it sounds like a number of you have kids that are in faraway locations, but if ideally you want to be located in the same town and in the same school district, because when that happens, then the kids can be 50% visitation and they wind up going to the same school. And so, um, that then makes it really easy for them to have consistent community support, same sports teams, after school events, parent teachers nights, birthdays. Ideally, you want to be living kind of in the same school district. And then it opens up the door for co-parenting, where hopefully you can be at these, the child's special events, without having drama or trauma show up. I feel that that's, you know, by talking about that with the spouse and then working through that, then that can be really helpful for the children. There's making an amends in there, but there's making an amends for consequences that were unintended. And so it's, you don't have to admit to being wrong to leverage a situation, which is nonviolent communication. It's a generative conversation that allows you to stay in communication and hopefully open that door up. And it over time, it can open up more and more. Have you ever studied how improv is done? You never make the other person wrong in an improv situation. You always leverage what they're saying and you roll forward with it. And so that's kind of a way to do generative communication and nonviolent communication. You acknowledge the situation the way they've described it, and then lean in curiosity to see if you can expand it to cover where it is that you want to go with it. And asking for help. You know, how should I deal with this? How can we deal with this together? Because I'm sure the situation is going to come up. On my day, when I have him first, and there's a soccer game, if you want to come, it's okay with me. You know, you build the bridge. The conversation that started a softening in the relationship with my former ex, my kids were much older. This was after 20 years of minimal conversation and animosity and everything else. And I called her up and I said, look, you know, I don't want to blame you. I'm done with it. I'm not angry at you. I'm not mad at you, but I love our kids. And there are no two people better in the world able to raise our 4 children than the 2 of us. Nobody knows our kids better than the 2 of us we do. And they deserve the best from us. So I want to open up a communication channel with you. If you have a concern about the kids, I would love for you to feel that you could call and we could talk about it together, how best we could help them. And I would like you to give me permission so that I could feel free to call you and say, look, I have a serious concern with number 3 kid or whatever. And I could really use some advice and suggestions in terms how to deal with it. And so I built the bridge around doing what's best for the kids and said, hey, look, I don't care about what happened in the past. I don't want to be angry or mad at you or anything like that. So. Sasha, so helicopter parenting, real quick, I want to leave you with something for that. We can explore it in more detail next time. What happens is that we become so prescriptive that the children don't know when to believe us or not believe us. They don't know when to take what you're saying seriously or not seriously. So what you want to do is you want to couch it in terms of an educational moment. So the perfect example that I have for you is that well, I had one of my kids, they were 4 years old, and they were climbing up on a rocking chair. And they wanted to stand up on the rocking chair and rock the rocking chair. And as a parent, I said, oh, this is crazy. They're going to fall off. They're going to hit their head. They're going to hurt themselves. So I wanted to say no, and I wanted to grab him by the arm and yank him off the chair and say, don't do that. And so what I learned is that tough love when they're younger is so much better than when they're teenagers, because they're going to allow him, give him the warning, say, look, if you do this, it's most likely that you will fall down and you will hurt yourself. And so then when he eventually, or she eventually does fall down and hurt themselves, they recognize that you were right. And it builds a credibility factor. And so what happens is that over time, they learn to trust you. Now, if they don't learn before they become 14 or 15 years old, they kind of become aliens, and then you can't do any learning until they become human again, which is around 21 or 22, which is fairly typical. Not everybody goes through that, but I definitely had that experience. But the sooner that you can allow them to make mistakes where your learning and your education could have saved them difficulty or pain or discomfort, the more they're going to learn to trust you and take your advice and listen to you more carefully. You know, the same for you, Ian, with your 4-year-old. He's going to want to challenge you to try new things, and you're going to want to choose your battles to let him fall down and hurt himself when he doesn't take your advice, so that he learns to trust you and value your advice. All right, guys, I'm really glad that you came. Appreciate all of your attendance and all that you added to the conversation tonight. It's a pleasure to meet you all.